access the podcast of OA. Located deep within Sector 14845 and powered by the Emerald Light of Will, the podcast of OA is your guide to the Green Lantern universe. Hosted by Lantern Myron Rumsey, the podcast of OA begins now.
Fans, this is Myron Rumsey, the co-host of the podcast of OA, and you are listening to episode number 156 of our wonderful Green Lantern show by Green Lantern fans for Green Lantern fans. And I am, as always, joined by a co-host, and this is my good friend Phil Bova, joining us again from New Parent Land. So, Phil, how's New Parent Land going?
Well, I'll say this for all the Green Lantern fans in terms that they can understand. It's really tests your willpower to be a parent at 46 years old.
I bet.
It's going good. I mean, you know, I always have to tell myself, I mean, he's at 5 weeks old, little Clark. And, you know, you want to try to figure out what's going on. But then in hindsight, you got to take a step back and say, you know, I can't figure out what's going on because he's not able to convey these messages that I want to hear. So I need to pull back and I need to remain calm and I need to muscle myself through it by sheer willpower to not completely lose my mind in the process. But it's going well. I mean, he's healthy. He's growing. He's eating. He's still battling a little stomach issues he has, and growth spurts are starting to hit here and there, but he's coming along, and all I can say is he's healthy, and that's the main thing. So
just wait until his X-ray vision and super strength kicks in.
Oh gosh. It's sometimes I'm holding him, he'll get into his little crying spats and he'll start just kicking, you know, and he'll straighten out like a board. He'll plank it, full on plank, and he goes stiff and he just kicks hard too. It's funny.
Wow.
But he's doing good. Little Clark's doing great, and it's fun being a parent, you know, for a second time. I mean, my son's 18, but, you know, long story short behind that, I was never married to his mom, and I wasn't around during the beginning parts of his childhood. And so this is all new to me, you know, in a new sense. And it's interesting. You know, I can say that there should be like a fourth trimester, you know, for parenting for those 3 months where the infant needs to work out its issues before they should be allowed to come home with the parent.
Well, you know, we all wish you and your lovely wife well with this new adventure. And all I can say is, as the father of a 28-year-old, enjoy every moment, because it's such a great experience. It's a great thing. Anyway, we've got some Green Lantern comics to talk about. We were going to normally do a retro review for our second episode in February, and we kind of got a little bit behind, and we're now recording this the very first day of March. So we're going to kick the month of March off with talking not so much about old books as we are something new, but also something old. We just need something borrowed and something blue. But we're going to talk about one of the new Wal-Mart 100-page giants that is from Beyond the Unknown, that features a brand new Green Lantern story, as well as a reprint of a classic Green Lantern short story by Alan Moore. And then we're also going to talk about the Green Lantern Facsimile issue #1 that DC just came out with a little while ago. And for those that have not bought one of these Facsimile editions, they're really kind of neat. It's not like just a regular reprint of a story. It's a reprint of the book exactly as it was printed back in the day. So it has all the original ads. It has the original letters column. Really neat stuff. And you see some of the things in these old Silver Age books that they used to throw in that were educational. So I'm looking forward to talking about that. And, you know, you and I don't think we can do a DC Comics podcast and not talk about DC Comics news. And of course, the big news, which is taking up a lot of headlines and a lot of chatter, is the sudden departure of Dan DiDio as co-publisher of DC Comics. It came about very, very abrupt, so abrupt that individuals from DC's hierarchy who were at the Comics Pro conference didn't know about it until they read it on social media themselves. So it's been very tumultuous. DC really, we're 2 weeks later, and DC still hasn't issued an official statement. The only thing that's happened from an official standpoint is that at this weekend's C2E2 comic book convention, Jim Lee talked about the future of DC Comics and trying to dispel some of the rumors. There were rumors going about perhaps that Time Warner would shut down, not Time Warner, but AT&T, who now owns Time Warner, but that AT&T would shut down DC Comics because of sales, and that maybe they would license the characters out. So, of course, there was all the rumors about Marvel taking over publishing DC books and all kinds of things running about. And Jim Lee basically tried to say, DC Comics is going to be around for a while. He's there as the sole publisher, and he kind of alluded to the fact that there would be no other co-publisher. So we're in a new era, Phil. I'm not sure what's your thoughts about this whole thing.
Well, I don't see how. I don't know if I'd say it like that. Let's put it like this: AT&T is a big company, and Time Warner is too. I can't see how DC Comics is making so much little of money to where it's affecting their bottom line. You know what I mean? I think there's other areas that have suffered, and I fear that the comic books themselves by DC is going to take the brunt of it if that's the case. I mean, if you look back on the Justice League stuff and the Batman versus Superman and the movies, they took a big hit, both in their publicity, both in their media and their market. And I don't think that level, I think they took a bigger hit in that area than the comic book industry, but I don't know. It just seems kind of weird that there would be some kind of issue where DC Comics are going to sell out and license their characters to other publishers. I mean, it's almost like throwing in the towel. You know what I mean? It's almost like, okay, we're not going to produce Pepsi anymore. We're going to sell it to Vess. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, hold on. Pepsi's going away? How is that even possible? I mean, does that make sense? I mean, kind of like that's the best analogy I can come up with.
Right. Yeah, I don't know what is actually going on, and it's interesting. There are a couple of different stories going on about why Dan DiDio was so abruptly let go. One of them being, both of them echoing similar sentiments, but coming from kind of two different angles. One was that AT&T was excited about 5G and they're the ones pushing 5G. Another one was that they aren't pushing 5G and they're a little nervous about how it impacts the properties. But the commonality in these two stories was that they were getting a lot of complaints from the people working on the 5G books because they're deep in this. This is apparently going to happen in October, and they're working on this stuff right now. And that Dan DiDio kept shifting the playing field and making changes and essentially micromanaging the process to the point at which people were getting very, very frustrated, and editors were leaving as a result. And AT&T just said, listen, if this is where we're going, you can't be doing what you're doing. I don't know if it was exactly the best way to deal with it. I mean, you've got someone who, let's make no mistake, Dan DiDio's been a controversial figure, as a lot of publishers would be, because they're making big decisions and they're not always popular decisions, or they're always unpopular with a segment of the readership. But at the same time, Dan DiDio is somebody who had over 18 years with the company, and he wasn't allowed a gracious exit. So I don't know, it's business at the end of the day. And we know that business doesn't always care about sentimentality. In fact, they don't at all. So, I guess it is what it is. But we'll see what happens. I mean, I don't think any of us as fans really knows what's going on, and we probably will never find out all the details. And rightly so. They're entitled to do things in their way, and I guess we'll see how things shake loose. I mean, one of the things that Jim Lee said over the weekend at the convention was that 5G is not a big massive reboot. So, there's a lot of conjecture, and we're just as guilty as anybody else in speculating. But I mean, I guess.
Well, I guess my biggest issue is why the shroud of secrecy. I understand that you have an event coming up and you don't want to release details. It's much the same as a movie's coming out. They released 3 back in the days when movies came out. You saw a trailer for a movie, and then you barely saw another trailer for another year and then the movie came out. Or you saw a little small TV promo spots. But now the regular regime is there's 3 trailers before the release. Every movie does it, and they don't give away any spoilers. They don't give away any secrets. They just release the trailers, and then you go see the movie, and that's the end of the day. But to me, that's always worked, and it's always functioned, because you're basically not giving away the car, but you're giving away the keys to get into the car. So going into the comic book industry, why the shroud of secrecy on what you're going to eventually roll out? Jim Lee says that this 5G is not a reboot. That's fine. So what is it then? Is it speculation now? Okay, so what does that mean by speculation? I'll go back to what you said about these editors and publishers and these writers. They write books years out in advance, And if you are a writer and you're writing a Batman book or Superman book or whatever, and you've already written the storyline out for a year, and then all of a sudden you got somebody coming in saying, well, this needs to be pulled, this needs to be pulled, then let alone that you get rid of the guy that's calling the shots. I mean, that is a big hit, and not only is it a big hit towards the publishing, but it's also a big hit to the fans, because then we're left in limbo. And fans don't like to be left with just breadcrumbs. And you and I both know that there's a lot at stake when it comes to the Marvel movies, the DC universe. I mean, it's at its height of this fandom, and the fandom is really, really harsh these days. So it wouldn't be unusual for them to pull these shots, and they're going to lose a big fan base in the process, because people get pissed. Well, I'm not going to read that anymore, because why should I? They're not giving us fans anything. They're not transparent enough to let us know, hey, what's going on? This is what's happening. You don't have to give us all the information, but at least give the fans something, so they can at least be at ease to know their books are going to be there tomorrow when they want to read them. But unfortunately, time and again with Time Warner, they call the shots with all this stuff, and here we are, and it's almost like the same boat with their movies, and they don't seem like they got anything streamlined. But I don't know. It's disappointing. I'm not affected by DiDio leaving. He put a lot into it. I mean, he's a big man over there, but at the end of the day, I'm affected by the fact that, I'm tired of all this. I'm tired of the washing out, the shadow of secrecy, the pulling stuff at the last minute. I mean, when you got a good friend that you've been with for 20 years, and then you hear from social media that your friend got fired, I mean, what does that mean? What does that tell you about the industry that you work for? I mean, it just seems like it's childish kind of mentality, to where they don't have any form of professionalism. And that's the end of my rant.
Yeah, I don't know everything that's going on, obviously. And I think in terms of the secrecy, some of it, the fact that it was leaked out before they were ready to actually announce anything, I don't know. I mean, DC didn't come out and say what was happening, and it was leaked out through some different websites that are out there. And so that got the speculation train running. That's all it takes these days. And I don't think DiDio did a good job of responding to it, to allay fears, or to come and really explain more. I mean, he tried to say, well, there's a lot of misinformation out there. Well, that doesn't really tell anybody anything other than there might be some information out there. Well, it didn't relieve anybody's fears, and I think a lot of the hand wringing about this is that, some people buy comics because they like the art. Some people buy the comics and they're just there to read a good story. For some people, they're deeply emotionally invested in the characters. And for those people, anytime you're going to do anything that shakes up the status quo, there's certainly some anxiety that gets created. Even though they're fictional characters, people are deeply invested with them. I remember to this day, the day that Emerald Twilight came out, and I was very depressed about the whole thing. And because a character that meant a great deal to me and that I was very much emotionally invested in was taken down a road that didn't make any sense to me in a story which made even less sense to me. So, I understand why people get kind of, they get anxious about it. And I guess all we can do is wait and see, and hope that there are people that are thinking about the people in decision-making positions that think about how much some of these characters have inspired people and are very, very important to them on an emotional let alone an intellectual level. So, we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens.
Right.
But
Yeah.
anyway, so we've got some comics to talk about. So let's take a quick break and let's come back and let's talk about From Beyond the Unknown.
Awesome. All right, Myron, welcome back. Here we go. From Beyond the Unknown, the Walmart exclusive 100-page giant. And I do have to give a big shout out to my friend Brian. He was kind enough to pick it up at his Walmart over across the river from me, since mine didn't have it. I remember I sent you the picture that night because the one I came across, it wasn't the right one. So I guess they didn't have them in yet. So I called up Brian, and he said, yeah, I'll pick one up for you. So this one, a lot of stories in this one, but we're only focusing on a couple. Various artists, various writers. But we'll jump right into the Green Lantern story at the very beginning with Hal Jordan. And it didn't really have a name to this story, did it? I don't think it did. Oh, wait a minute. Here we go.
It was called In Gloom.
In the Gloom. Right. So this is an all-new story. So we start off, as usual, ramble between Hal Jordan and our illustrious blue-headed monsters. I can say that I didn't miss them. But I will say that Dave, I guess it's Dave Realgaz, stays true to the form of the banter between the Guardians and Hal Jordan. Their tenuous relationship, so to speak.
Yeah, and Dave is probably more well known as an editor at DC than he is a writer. But at any rate, I think this is his first Green Lantern story. And just to add a little note, at one point, Ken Rockefeller, who drew this issue, had posted some pictures on social media from this issue with no one knowing what it was about. And he, of course, wouldn't tell anybody. So people have been wondering what this story was going to be and where it was going to appear. And now we have the answer to that question.
Which, I have to say, I like his art. It's really, really good art. It's rougher than what we're used to with seeing Sharp, with the smoothness of all his panels and everything. But I did like the way he drew Hal Jordan. I thought Hal Jordan looks great. The Guardians, doesn't matter how you draw the Guardians, they still look funny no matter what. So we start off with Hal Jordan battling Dr. Polaris on the opening pages, and then of course you got the banter going back between him and the Guardians, who are over the intercom, so to speak. But an interesting note to what they were talking about. So they were talking about, basically what they're talking about is Hal Jordan and his duty to patrol Sector 2814. And I thought it was kind of humorous that it's like they're getting on his case about patrolling Sector 2814, yet there's 5 other Earth Lanterns that could be doing it at the same time. So why does Hal Jordan have to take the brunt of their insults,
Right. Well, and technically, in continuity, if there is continuity anymore, right. Hal and John and Guy were essentially, and Kyle were honor guard lanterns, so they wouldn't be assigned a specific sector. So I don't know where in time this story takes place. Maybe it takes place before all of that happened. I don't know. I mean, it's new costumes, so I mean, this could take place early in the Jeff Johns run, I suppose. But anyway,
I digress. So we go into, and then one of my all-time favorite baddies shows up, Bolfunga.
Bolfunga, the unrelenting.
Oh gosh! Every time I read a comic book with that guy, I can't help but laugh. Such an absurd character, and I actually enjoy him. He reminds me a lot of kind of like a toned down version of Lobo.
Yeah, kind of. You're right.
Yeah. And then, of course, Hal Jordan comes across these characters called the Gloom. Now, you'd probably know the answer to this. Have they been around in the Lantern universe before? Because I don't think I remember seeing these people.
Nope. These are a new creation.
I do like them, though. I think they're pretty. I like how they. I like how their concept is formed because their conscious or their soul gets uploaded into a warrior body.
Yeah, it's interesting. Neat concept.
It is. It was a neat concept. So we go to the battle between Hal Jordan and Dr. Polaris, and it shifts right to Bolfunga, and then of course the Gloom gets involved, and then of course you got a three-way battle taking place between Hal Jordan, the Gloom, and Bofunga. Okay, so let's see, where else are we? Then, of course, early on, Green Lantern, Hal Jordan gets he gets put down and gets knocked out completely.
I love the surfboard that looks like a whale or a shark.
Yeah, it really does. Yeah, it looks like a whale. Yeah, it does look like a whale. But I was kind of curious of how he got. I don't know, it seemed like he got taken down pretty easy by these people. You know.
I think because the Gloom were designed to take on Green Lanterns, their ability to weaken their willpower was essentially what would happen in this situation. It was neat to see. It was a neat story. I like the overall where this goes as to why the Gloom are after Hal in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Right, because of their planet being destroyed. But that's happened before, you know. And they call them out for accountability, and that's always been like one of the things that's been focused upon in a lot of comic books, you know, about accountability or whatnot. And, you know, I think Hal Jordan handled this situation as best as he could possibly could, given the circumstances, you know. But, okay, so he gets his ring back because they take his ring, and he escapes captivity with Bofunga in tow. And then they end up making their way back to Oa, which was kind of cool because he wanted them to go back to Oa to state their case, which I thought was kind of an interesting twist, you know.
Right.
And then, of course, back on the planet Oa, I guess did they capture him? Is that a science cell that they're being held in?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that's what I thought. And then it had that little tidbit about Martian Manhunter, you know, contacting Hal Jordan through his ring. I guess it has to be through his ring.
Yeah.
Which I thought Martian Manhunter was telepathic. At any rate, and then of course the Justice League have a problem with Eclipso, and he wants him to assist, and Hal doesn't go though. He stays, and he has to take care of some other business. Which go Hal, because like he says in here, you know, let's see, where does he say it at? He talks about how they have to take care of it on their own. There's the Justice League has other people that can take care of it, which goes back to what I said earlier about the other Earth Lanterns. You know, it's like, okay, well, I don't know where this is in continuity because Hal Jordan's not in the Justice League anymore. It's John Stewart, you know, and then of course Jessica Cruz over in Odyssey. So I don't know exactly how or where this does take place, which I think maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's just an encapsulated story in and of itself, just a short story or whatnot. And that's pretty much the end of the short little story, which I felt like it could have gone on a little bit more. I wish it would have gone on a little bit more.
Yeah, I really liked it. I thought it was a neat story. And again, it was only about 16 pages, which is close to a full-size issue of a comic book. But I like the fact that Hal has that nobility to say, you know, you guys are right. I let you guys down because I was too Earth centric, and now they're patrolling the entirety of my sector, which I think is kind of a neat take on it. And it's interesting when you look back over Hal's career, there have been times where he's been called out before. I mean, there was that one whole storyline where the Guardians sentenced Hal to a year off of Earth for exactly those reasons. So it's kind of a neat tie back to those things. And yeah, the artwork is neat. I thought the story was neat. And yeah, you don't know exactly where it falls in the timeline. And I guess you don't have to know where it falls to get the gist of the story. But I liked it. I thought it was neat. Again, it comes back to, you know, so many times when something happens in the real world that's wrong, and we're like, well, where were the police or where were the people to stop this? And we don't know where, you know, and sometimes there's very good reasons.
Well, and also like I like the Gloom. I hope we see more. I hope they use the Gloom more. I don't know if they will or not because this is a different writer or whatnot. But I really like their characterization. I like their outfits were kind of cool, and like I said, the concept was kind of neat of how they were formed. So I think it would make a really, really good kind of villain base with the Green Lantern Corps. But then again, you never know when you're going to see him again, unfortunately.
Yeah, it could be just a one-off, but it's a neat. This book in all is really kind of neat because you had the new Green Lantern story. You had an all new story by Kamandi, the Last Boy on Earth, and an all new story of Legion of Superheroes, and then some reprints, including a Superman and Adam Strange team up, a Batman and the Metal Men team up, and then a Green Lantern story at the back.
Yeah, one of the Rot Lop Fan.
Yeah, the origin of Rot Lop Fan. I thought that was really neat to see. It's an Alan Moore, Bill Willingham story, and it's a reprint from Tales of the Green Lantern Corps Annual number 1 or number 3, excuse me, from the 80s, from 1987.
Yeah, that was really, really cool. I do not recall ever reading this at that. I mean, I wouldn't be able to think if I did read it or not, but I don't recall it. I don't recall reading the origin of Rot Lop Fan before, and he's always been an interesting character to me because he doesn't use the spectrum, the light spectrum, like the other Green Lanterns do. And it's kind of cool how Katmatui initiates him more or less into the Green Lantern Corps, but in a way that's unique to his personality.
Yeah. I thought it was really a neat tale, and the way it's told is interesting because you don't see a lot of stories told in a retrospective way. This whole story, everything that's happened between Katmatui and Rot Lop Fan has already taken place. And basically it's Katmatui giving her report to the Guardians because they sent her to the Obsidian Depths to recruit someone into the Corps. And when she gets there, she of course finds out that nobody can see anything. And so she has to try to, how do you make the concept of light relatable to somebody who's never experienced light and isn't capable of it. So it's an inventive solution, and this is why we get the F-sharp bell and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it was a really neat story. And again, it's a real short story because for those that aren't familiar with Green Lantern Corps Quarterly, it was a quarterly anthology that had several stories in it about different Green Lantern characters. And this was often where they would introduce new characters, or they'd flesh out the history of a character who, maybe has become a fan favorite, like a Jack Chance type character that has become a favorite. And they don't really have the time in the pages of the regular ongoing books to give them the spotlight, and so they would do it in the pages of Green Lantern Corps Quarterly. A type of book I would love to see right now is this kind of a book, an anthology book. Yeah,
I totally agree, because I feel like we're so far away from the Green Lantern Corps itself that at this point you don't even know who's a member or not anymore. Besides your initial Kilowog, your fan favorites, your Kilowogs, your Rot Lop Fan and stuff, but there's supposed to be, and there was at one time, 3,600 lanterns, right, in the Corps. But when's the last time you saw them all in a book? Right.
Well, this book is out now at a Wal-Mart near you, hopefully. And it's called From Beyond the Unknown. And it's got kind of an old style cover with Superman and Adam Strange on the cover. But you'll see Hal in the upper left-hand corner and then the lower left-hand corner. So it's not too hard to pick out. But again, not a bad value, $4.99 for a 100-page giant. It reminds me of the old giants that used to come out back in the day. So I think these are really kind of cool books. You get a couple of new stories and you get some reprints.
Yeah, I totally dig it. I read the rest of the stories. They were all pretty good. The Adam Strange one was really interesting too, because it's going to be nice because he's supposed to be coming back. Tom King, I think, is writing that book that's coming, or his character's coming back.
Yes, Strange Adventures.
Yeah, so it's kind of nice seeing him back on a page, especially with Superman. I've always been a big Superman fan, so. But yeah, this was a really good book and well worth its value if you guys get your hands on it.
Speaking of, just to touch base really quickly on that Tom King Strange Adventures book, it was either him or Doc Shaner, I can't remember which one, teased on social media that Hal's going to show up in that book.
Oh, that would be cool. That's going to be nice. Well, it seems like they're synonymous. I miss the New Gods. I remember when the New Gods used to show up all the time in the books, and I miss them being utilized.
Yeah, I agree. So Phil, let's pause for a second, and then let's talk about Green Lantern #1 Facsimile Edition.
Okay, sounds good.
Listen up, Lanterns. It's time you took the oath with Green Lantern John Stewart. In brightest day, in blackest night, don't let the podcast of Oa escape your sight. Let those who worship evil's might beware my power. Green Lantern's Light.
So everybody, thanks for coming back and listening to us talk about some Green Lantern comics. One of the trends that's been going on at DC recently has been this whole trend of doing facsimile editions, which is really cool because it doesn't just give you the story, it gives you the issue as it appeared in the stands back in the day, obviously with a modern cover price, but it's reprinted page for page, and the colors are obviously enhanced and pop more than you would find if you could pick up a copy of a book that was one of the ones they chose as a facsimile edition. But one of the ones that just came out was Green Lantern #1 from 1960. So you're looking at a 60-year-old book. So pretty fascinating. What's cool about them is all the old ads are in here, as well as some of the features that DC used to put in their books back in the day. So this book starts out with a story called The Planet of Doomed Men. And I think when DC looked at this, they were like, well, this is a first issue. We don't want to tell Hal's origin necessarily because we did that already in Showcase 22, but it's been some time between when that was printed and this is being printed. So there is a short, maybe 2-3 page recap of Hal's origins. They do essentially end up retelling it in the pages of this book. So if somebody at the time had not had Showcase 22, they could get a 6 or 7 page origin of Hal Jordan and Green Lantern right there. And then it jumps to one of the things that I think is really endearing about these old books is there's a full page on Nobel Science winners. So it's a 4-panel deal about, there's a panel on Madame Curie, a panel about Albert Einstein, there's another one about Albert Michelson, and then there's another one about someone whose name I cannot pronounce, but he was a Nobel Prize winner for mathematics. And they sprinkled those things in books to give some educational value, and it's really neat to see that kind of thrown in.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, you don't see a lot of that kind of stuff anymore.
No, not really. And the next story really talks about Hal going to a planet in his sector. And really, this is where this series, right from the very beginning, embraced the science fiction part of what you could do with superhero comics. And so Hal goes to this planet. Interesting. All the aliens are yellow-skinned.
Of course.
But he's not there to fight them. He's there to protect them from a giant 60-foot high gorilla type creature, basically a 60-foot high space gorilla. And he fights the space gorilla who has some mental energy powers. He basically, in short order, saves them by freezing the giant ape and then lifting him with a giant pair of tongs and dropping him in the Arctic climate of the planet to protect the people. And that's kind of it. They basically had to get back in 24 hours because back then they didn't protect their power battery in a pocket dimension. So Hal would leave Earth and have to solve whatever the mission was in 24 hours or his ring would run out of a charge. Kind of a neat idea.
Yeah, really cool.
Then there's a whole full page thing on black magic, which is highly entertaining because it's a 1960s perspective on black magic. Really kind of cool. But to me, the most entertaining thing before they jump to the next story is the mail column. There's Green Lantern's mail chute. And, we talk about today how when characters get replaced, how there's always this backlash because the internet allows you to have all this instantaneous dialogue and communication. And when you go back to the Silver Age and think about the fact that Alan Scott hadn't been in print for, close to a decade at this point, were there fans who were upset because Alan Scott got replaced by Hal? And it starts right out with a letter from a 24-year-old reader named Bob Saxon from Oklahoma. And it talks about how is this a continuation and where's Doiby Dickles going to show up kind of thing. And they go on to explain this isn't a reiteration. And then you have in the same letter columns people that have been enjoying these new adventures. And they enjoyed, obviously, what was in Showcase because there was no issue of Green Lantern for them to comment on up to this point. But to me, the most fascinating letter in this whole first issue is there is a letter from a young Roy Thomas who eventually goes on to have a very illustrious career in the comic book industry. He was inducted into the Will Eisner Comic Book Hall of Fame. At one point, he was the editor-in-chief at Marvel Comics.
Very cool. Did not know that. That's good information right there.
So it's really cool to see a letter from this young version. He would have been 20 years old at this point, so he's not that young by some standards. But I think in your case, in my case, we look at that as young.
Yeah.
And he basically goes out and provides some suggestions, and you can see the creativity of this individual of Roy Thomas at this age, talking about what he would think he'd like to see happen with the comics. Kind of cool.
I wonder if he remembers writing that letter. You know what I mean? If you asked him.
Yeah, I don't know. And then there's a letter here that I know, Phil, you would really appreciate. The person wrote the letter saying Green Lantern is their favorite character, and they listed their top 10 favorite characters. Number 1 was Green Lantern. Number 2 was Robot Man. Number 3 was Roy Raymond. I'm not sure. I can't remember who Roy Raymond is. Number 4 was Superman. And then all the way down at number 10 was Batman and Jimmy Olsen, who are tied.
Well, at least they're number 10.
When I read that, I had to look to see if it was you that wrote it.
Yeah. Batman wouldn't even make my top 10.
And then there is a letter from somebody who was kind of trolling them, making fun of a lot of comics, which I'm not sure why, but they reprinted it. I don't know if it's a real letter, if this is a mid 20th century troll, or if this is an attempt at humor by their part. But then it jumps to the second story called The Menace of the Giant Puppet. And in the cover of this issue has the very colorful Harlequin-esque giant clown puppet on the cover. It was a cover drawn by our good friend Joe Giella. I have a large print of this cover that he signed for me last year at Terrificon. And this whole story is, again, it's another mind control type story. This one really starts to balance the whole Carol Ferris is Hal Jordan's love, but she loves Green Lantern trope. It starts in full force here, and he's trying to deal with this, and this really poses a distraction from him making time with Carol. And of course, the villain is wearing a yellow outfit.
Of course. And you have to, right?
Just very, very charming from the old Silver Age. Whatever the hero's weakness is, every villain has to make use of it. So this guy, this bright yellow jumpsuit is taking Hal on, and how do they know it's Hal's weakness?
I know, right? It does kind of make you laugh. I mean, but those old school comics were so good back in the day. I remember writing in many a times when the letters to the editor. I don't think any of mine got published by any means and put in comic books, but I remember writing in, and I had a good time doing it. I'd sit down one night and I'd write a short letter to Superman when I was reading Superman or whatnot, and a bunch of other ones. And I probably wrote total in my history maybe about 20 different types of letters. Who knows whatever happened to them, but it was fun back then doing it. Nowadays you just send an email or tag them on social media, but back then that's the only contact you had was to write a letter into the publishers and hopes that somebody would answer you.
There's a comical bit in this whole thing where Green Lantern is dancing with Carol Ferris at a nightclub. And the hypnotic ray beam that he's using to control people reaches out and grabs Hal's foot. Hal is Green Lantern. Grabs his foot while he's trying to dance with Carol and kind of makes a misstep. And then it grabs his arm and it pulls him away from Carol's arms. And he literally looks like a puppet with these purple beams around his arms and legs, yanking him away. But you can just kind of see he's trying to dance with her, and he can't even kind of break now as Green Lantern because he's trying to dance with Carol, and he gets made to look like he can't dance. And Hal, in ironic fashion, he can't do anything to the guy's yellow outfit, but he can catch him around the wrists, and so on. So he basically takes the gentleman to the puppet masters, they call him, to the police headquarters, hanging by 4 strings, so he looks like a marionette in and of himself. And it ends, of course, with Hal going to knock on Carol's door, and her disappointed it's Hal and not Green Lantern that has come to pay a visit.
Oh, poor Carol.
You poor misguided young woman. And then there's also a piece of scientific information at the end of the book called "Strange Satellites" that talks about some of the moons of Jupiter, which is kind of neat.
That is neat.
There's
That's
even
really neat.
I don't know whether this coupon is still valid, but there's a coupon it's worth 70 cents to ride the Turnpike Highway at Palisades Park in New Jersey.
That'd be something. Wouldn't it be something if somebody actually tried to submit that, see if they'd honor it?
There's a free ride for the Caterpillar and a free ride for the Tilt-A-Whirl, and I think they have to take it because there's no expiration date on it.
Oh, that'd be so worth it. That'd be so worth it just to buy the Facsimile edition just to do that.
And of course, there's the bodybuilder ad in the back.
Gotta have those. There's a lot, man. Those were a lot. They had those in all the comic books back in those times, you know.
Yeah, it's fun. The ads are fun. The back cover's got an ad for a signet ring from the Wilson Chemical Company in Tyrone, Pennsylvania.
There's times when I do miss the ads in the books, you know, like they used to have.
It's cool because in order to get the ring, there's a picture of 4 presidents on the back, and there's 6 check boxes in the little coupon you clip out of the book, out of the cover, and you have to identify who the 4 presidents are.
Now, see, that's a learning procedure.
Right. There's, and for those that don't know, let's see. 1 was Lincoln, 2 is Ulysses S. Grant, 3 is Teddy Roosevelt, and 4 is Washington. So,
and anybody should know all 4 of those.
There's also no expiration date. I don't know if these guys are still in business, but 50 cents.
That's awesome.
Awesome. You had to have. You had to win the contest. I take that back. It was a contest, and you get 14 packages of White Cloverine brand salve. I don't know where to go with that one, but it's just charming to look at these old books. It really is, and to see them pop, it's almost like, if you've got any sense of imagination, you can almost envision what it must have been like to have been a kid back in the day and buy this right off the stands and have the crisp white pages and everything, and the colors just pop, and classic Gil Kane art, and
and then back then those colors, man, they were so vibrant.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So bright. They really were. I mean, and not to say that today's art, I mean, there are 2 different styles, obviously, because I mean, you're coming from 2 very different time eras. But I mean, there's an appreciation for the retro kind of look that a lot of these artists used back in those days, especially Gil Kane. Back when in the '60s art, and let alone the '70s. I mean, the psychedelic kind of art that came along. It's interesting to watch to see how art has changed over the course of time.
It is. It's obviously a bit simpler back in the day. There's not the level of detail you see now. And if you compared this to Liam Sharp or Nathan Van Sciver with all the detail they pack in, this is nothing like that at all.
They've definitely come a long way.
There's a lot of blank panels where there's, like when Hal's fighting the guy in the yellow jumpsuit, you see the machine the guy's using, the guy in the yellow jumpsuit and Hal, and everything else is just a green nothingness. Like there's no details in the walls behind him. There's just nothing there.
Yeah, and in nowadays fashion, that level of detail would be present.
Right. You'd have something most of the time anyway.
Right.
So Phil, this wraps up our comic book chat. Do you want to talk about Superman Red Sun? Because there's some Green Lantern stuff in that.
Yeah, I think we should, man, because I mean, this is a Green Lantern Corps podcast, but the way they used the Green Lanterns in that particular animation was spot on cool. I really liked it. I thought it was really cool.
All right, well, I need to wet my whistle, so let's pause for a second, and then we'll come back and we'll talk Superman Red Sun.
Okay.
This is Salak, Green Lantern of Sector 1418, and you are receiving the podcast of Oa.
All right, guys, welcome back. Well, we're going to talk about something a little bit off the channel, but it's still present because it has Green Lantern Corps in it, and that's the recent released DC animated feature, Superman Red Sun, which I will add is now my ultimate favorite DC animated feature ever put out to date. I absolutely loved it. I loved Millar's book when it came out. I bought the action figure. I got the T-shirt and everything, and I get weird looks when I wear it. But I thought it was an excellent, 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 excellent animated feature. What about you?
I never read the book. I did watch the movie, but I ended up watching it essentially with fresh eyes because I never read the book, so I don't have any real like sometimes when I watch these things, I always notice the differences between the book and the comic, and in this situation, I didn't do that, so I think it almost made the experience better for me. Because I just sometimes, this came out in 2003 when it was printed, and that was when I really wasn't buying comics. I had kind of said I'm going to boycott comics until they deal with the Green Lantern issue, and so this was one of the things I missed. And I've gone back and read several things, but this isn't one of them. So to me, it was a completely fresh take. And I liked it. I mean, one of the things that I thought was cool was hearing Phil Lamar back as John Stewart. That was really cool. Sam Liu directed it, and Sam did a lot of the stuff in Green Lantern the Animated Series, so that was really kind of cool to see that as well. Some other familiar voices as well. People like Phil Lamar, but Paul Williams is Brainiac.
Which Brainiac was really, really cool how they used him in this. Well, of course, people have to see it to understand, but Brainiac is on the side of basically your Russian version of Superman. Long story short, Superman's capsule lands in USSR, back in the Cold War era. So he's raised, his ideology is basically based off of Stalin's ideology when it comes to communistic values. And I thought the film really, 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 really played that out, how Superman had to, because it's so different from American values, being grown in the Midwest during 1940s America or 1930s America. But conversely, going over and growing up under Stalin's regime, and living in an authoritarian state, it was really interesting to see how Superman battled that dynamic in his head, especially when it came to like Wonder Woman coming along and showing him what was right and wrong, or the part where Batman played in this film, and let alone the part that the Green Lantern Corps played, which happened to be, I thought was a novel idea, a group of Green Lanterns. They had a ring, and they found the capsule, and of course it was Captain Hal Jordan in this one, and they, of course, I don't know how they mass produce or manufactured the rings, but they, in a sense, the American military grows their own Green Lantern Corps, and these guys make their rings, put their rings on, and they go to attack Superman. I liked the old. I liked how they looked. They looked like the old bomber styles, and they kind of looked like the old bomber pilots, but yet they were flying through the air with rings. And it had John Stewart in it. It had Guy Gardner in there, and I thought it was kind of neat to have those characters. Sadly, no Kyle, but of course that would have predated Kyle coming along.
Well, yeah, because the movie starts out, in the 1940s or 1930s, and it carries through to the 1980s. So it's a movie that spans a number of years. And so, yeah, you do see Hal, and you see John, and you see Guy, and it's a very militaristic take on the Green Lanterns, because they basically weaponize the Green Lantern ring. Right. The ship has crashed on Earth, and they're doing an autopsy on Abin Sur, who's a bit of a different character design, but kind of cool. More alien looking, definitely. And Lex Luthor is like, I haven't taken the ring off yet. And the scientist is like, well, we haven't been given permission. And so he reaches over and grabs a pair of cutting devices and cuts the ring finger off and pulls the ring off. And they're going to weaponize it. And Hal is chosen at that point. He's a captain. And by the end, he's a colonel. He basically is chosen to lead this military force that's going to be one of the potential answers to the Superman red and blue menace. Essentially. I did want to touch out, there were a couple other people's names I wanted to mention. I didn't think to mention earlier. Vanessa Marshall did the voice of Wonder Woman, who did a great job in this. And Vanessa Marshall did the voice of Galia on Green Lantern the Animated Series. And Jason Spizak, who was the voice of Razor, did the voice of Dimitri. And Frederick Weidman, who did the soundtrack, the score for all of the Green Lantern the Animated Series episodes, did the score for this one too. So this is very much there's a lot of connections.
Yeah, there is. You're right. There really is. What'd you think of? I thought it was cool how they showed John F. Kennedy in there. Of course, he had an animated John F. Kennedy thrown in there.
Yeah, and it was after his date of being assassinated. He wasn't assassinated in this timeline.
Right. Of course, Lex Luthor becomes president eventually. And then in good fashion, though, Lex Luthor is painted in a really, really good light in this. And, of course, he steps down later on, and I forgot the other guy's name, takes over as head of state.
Jimmy Olsen.
Jimmy Olsen, that's right. And then I thought it was cool how Superman sacrificed at the end.
Yeah, kind of, sort of, wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Yeah, I thought that the whole thing with Lex Luthor was really interesting, and it was odd to hear Diedrich Bader's voice as Lex Luthor because he usually does Batman. But it was cool to see how his future, his fate is so much different without Superman landing in the U.S. He really is a hero in this. Yeah. Granted, he takes some methods. He's willing to cross the line to do the right thing, but at the end of the day, he's ultimately a positive character in this movie, which makes you wonder.
Yeah,
is the fact that Lex Luthor is a bad guy in our reality Superman's fault?
Well, I mean, a lot of people would argue that point. You can't have the hero without the villain, and sometimes those lines are blurred.
The take on Batman was interesting. Batman being a character who is foreshadowed at one point in the movie, and comes back to be this very. He's promoting anarchy. He's basically trying to fight against the control that Superman has gained in Russia when Superman himself crosses the line. Yeah, kind of. He's very much an insurgent. He's a political activist gone over the edge, essentially, because Superman has taken control over Russia after crossing a line of his own, I should say, and. It's really kind of neat how they did the story, and from a Green Lantern perspective, it was cool to see a whole bunch of Green Lanterns, most of them no-name characters, go against Superman and almost hold their own. And in actuality, they did kind of end up beating Superman, if not for Wonder Woman intervening. Right,
which was kind of a neat take on Wonder Woman. Well, I mean, of course, she got the lasso broke, and then of course she lost most of her powers, and then she left defeated. Well, not really defeated, but she left, and then she comes back, and of course she regained her youth again and regained her powers, and then basically tells Superman, "Look, you're a dirtbag for what you're doing. I'm not going to tolerate it. I'm not going to put up with it. Peace out. You're not going to see me again." And then she leaves, and that's the last you see of her.
Yeah.
But it made him look real hard at his humanity, and that had to be tough.
I think Wonder Woman kind of got the typical Lois Lane role, where Lois sometimes questions Clark and / Superman, questions what's going on, or she's that voice of reason. And she couldn't do that in this movie because Lois Lane does not have the same connection to Superman in this movie as he does in our regular continuity. And so some of those things fall on Wonder Woman to do. And that was neat. I think my wife and my son got the biggest laugh at Hal's line after Roman leaves.
Is that when he gets punched? He got punched.
Yeah, he gets punched, and with Hal taken out, the Green Lanterns then they fall quickly because they don't have the leadership that they were used to having. He was kind of rallying them, and the reason why they were doing so well is because Hal was there to rally them and keep them pumped up. And when he's taken out of the picture, they kind of all just fall aside rather quickly.
But I liked it, man. I was a big fan of it. I was so super stoked when I heard they were making it. I just couldn't wait for it to come out. And the day it came out, I was like, oh yeah, I'm grabbing that one right away.
I'm a sucker for physical media, and I was like, I'm going to wait until March 17th. But then I was like, I really want to see this one. So I ended up buying it digitally. So I'll probably, when I get the physical copy, I'll do something on social media and give away the redemption code for the free digital copy, because I already essentially have it at this point.
That'd be a cool idea. And I can't recommend the book enough. I mean, the book, it stays pretty true to the form. There's a couple little differences in it, but nothing to the degree that it changes the storyline. I mean, it all pretty much stays the same, as far as the defeat of Brainiac at the end. And of course, you get your opposite Battle City of Condor in there, or Kandor, which is Stalingrad. I don't know if it was Stalingrad that was in there. I'm not sure which one it was.
I think it was Leningrad.
Leningrad, right? Okay, so but I thought it stayed true to form. And matter of fact, I remember posting something about how Mark Millar would be proud, because I mean it was good, and it's that has always been one of my favorite alternate Superman timeline books. I mean, one of my favorite Ultimate Superman books, period, because it's so unique and so different, and the status quo of every character in that book is entirely not what you would expect.
Yeah, I agree. Oh, and it was Stalingrad. You were correct. It was Stalingrad.
Stalingrad. Okay.
But yeah, it's neat. I mean, it was funny. I was very proud of my son. We were watching it, and he's like, "Well, when Abin Sur died, why didn't his ring go find another Green Lantern? Isn't that supposed to work, Dad? I mean, come on." And I was like, "Just shut up and watch the movie, will you?"
You didn't explain it to him. They had,
I said, well, originally before it got retro done, Abin Sur had to send the ring out to find a worthy successor. They didn't just do it on their own, which is true. So I was like, Abin Sur didn't get the chance to.
Right.
So that's why, son.
Good job, man. Way to be.
Yeah, way to be. But definitely worth watching it. If you want to, I don't think you can rent it at this point. I think you can only buy it digitally, but it's definitely worth a watch. They're doing Apocalypse War, I guess, is one of the ones they're going to be doing next, but it's going to be a Justice League Dark movie. So I'm not sure we're going to get to see, I was really looking forward to when I first heard that being announced that we'd get to see the scene between Batman and Hal where, Batman at one point tells Hal that, the ring is what makes you special. And then near the end, he tells him it's the other way around.
Yeah.
But I guess we're probably not going to get that
one. Apocalypse War, huh? That's the next one.
Yeah, but apparently it's gonna be Justice League Dark. So I don't know. They're really gonna go off and adapt it in a different way, I'm assuming.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
But anyway, it was definitely worth watching. Hal was voiced by an actor by the name of Sasha, and I'm gonna probably pronounce the last name wrong, but I'm gonna say Roiz. It's Roiz. He played in the TV show Grimm. He was also in Caprica. I know who you're talking about. The Battlestar Galactica spinoff.
Yeah.
So that was cool. Definitely cool.
It was
worth watching. All right. Well, we should be back in a couple weeks to be talking about Green Lantern Season 2, Number 2. And you and I are hopefully going to be having a conversation with Liam Sharp either before that episode or after that episode. It depends on scheduling.
Looking forward to it. I can't wait to talk to the guy. It's gonna be fun.
Yeah, I think so. I think it'll be a lot of fun. So we should be back hopefully in a couple weeks. If things work out right, we'll make up for only having one episode last month by having 3 in March.
That'd be cool. We can do that.
Alrighty, guys. Well, until next time, as always, keep that power ring charged, treat each other well, and make every day your brightest day.
And we'll be back here soon.
The Podcast of OA is the official podcast of the blog of OA and a proud member of the Comics Podcast Network. Share your comments and questions by calling the show's voicemail line at 406-POD-OA. That's 406-763-6362. You can send your emails to podcast@blogofoa.com. You can also find the Blog of OA and the Podcast of OA on Twitter and Facebook. Green Lantern and other related characters are the copyrighted property of DC Comics Incorporated and are used without permission. The Blog of OA and the Podcast of OA are fan productions and do not claim any ownership over the Green Lantern or any other copyrighted properties.